So I want to talk tonight about courage. And you may wonder why I want to talk about courage on Christmas Eve and what does that have to do with the birth of Jesus? Well, let me explain. So one thing I notice throughout the birth narrative, which we find in the book of Luke, in the book of Matthew in the Bible, and they're two different accounts, and so they give two different kind of perspectives on the birth story, and it's really cool. You need to read both of them because they both provide so much richness and depth in explaining what happened around 2,000 years ago. But one thing I notice when I read the birth narratives is I see a tension between fear and courage. Every single person in this story was afraid. Every single one of them in the story was afraid. Mary, Joseph, Elizabeth, and Zechariah. King Herod was even afraid. The Magi were afraid. Maybe the innkeeper even was afraid. The shepherds were certainly afraid. They were all afraid. And here's the thing, they were all afraid, but the faithful ones in this story did not allow fear to hold them back from taking that next faithful step that God was leading them to take. They were all afraid, yet the faithful ones did not allow the fear to hold them back from taking that next faithful step. You know, I'm inspired by this quote by a brilliant woman named Joan Chittister, but she says, fear is not the opposite of courage. We often think that fear and courage are kind of opposites. She says fear is the catalyst of courage. Fear is not the opposite of courage, it's the catalyst of courage. You know, too often we allow fear to paralyze us. Time and time again, I've been afraid, and time again, what I've done is I've allowed that fear to paralyze me, and I freeze and I stall, or I abandon what I know to be right. Do y'all feel that? Does anybody else have that experience where fear can kind of have this paralyzing power over you and your will and kind of what you feel like you ought to be doing? In this birth narrative in Matthew and in Luke, we find these profound examples of normal struggling people who were terrified. They were terrified of this unknown, difficult path that lay before them. Yet, instead of being paralyzed and locked down by fear, they allowed their fear to be a catalyst or a spark for courage. You know, as I think about fear, for me, you know, the struggle or like kind of getting through something difficult, that's not so much what I'm afraid of. I mostly get afraid of the unknown, the uncertainty. That's what terrifies me. And too often what I do is, and you may do this as well, that I choose to kind of like latch on to this myth of certainty instead of stepping out into the unknown in courage. Too often we stick to what is comfortable and known when our transformation is to be found in the courage to face our fears and let go and take steps into those uncertain waters that are before us. You know, I think of churches. Man, churches, we struggle with this so much. Many churches are just stuck in the past, clinging to what feels certain and known to them. Our world is changing rapidly, and that changing world sometimes is so scary. And so what happens is we often cling to what feels comfortable. We cling to what we feel like we understand. We as individuals do this, just like churches and organizations and communities. We repeat bad patterns. We stick to our normal routines. We maintain unhealthy relationship dynamics. We cling to what is comfortable and known. And too often we miss out on the transformation and growth that is waiting for us if we were only willing to face our fears. A brilliant thinker that I love is named Parker Palmer. I've shared some stuff from him before with you all. But in his book, Let Your Life Speak, he talks about the winters in the upper Midwest. So in kind of the northern Midwest in the United States, we have pretty brutal winters. And he talks about how people that are from there face these harsh, freezing winters. You know, I got to travel to the Upper Peninsula, my wife and I did, in Michigan. And they told us up there that the Great Lakes, these massive lakes that look like oceans, that they literally freeze for like the entire winter. And people drive their cars out on these lakes because they're so frozen. It's crazy, brutal, cold, freezing winters. Y'all think it's cold out there tonight? In the upper Midwest, it can get really cold. And so the locals give this advice to newcomers, according to Parker Palmer. And this is just brilliant. He says, the winters will drive you crazy until you learn to get out into them. He says, instead of huddling fearfully by the fire in your home during the hard frozen winter months, they'll tell you it does a great deal of good to bundle up and take a daily walk in the winter world. In doing this, he says, will fortify the spirit by taking you boldly to the very heart of the season you fear. I love that. It'll fortify the spirit by taking you boldly to the very heart of the season that you fear. Man, getting out each day for those walks in that brutal cold winter to help you face the fear of that season, that's great advice, right? Great advice. And it's actually good advice for other types of winters that we face. Because we all go through winters of different kinds, don't we? Failures, betrayals, financial struggles, loneliness, family problems, pandemics. We never thought that would be one, right? And often what we do is we try to do whatever we can to avoid facing the fears associated with these wintry struggles of life. And perhaps the advice that the upper Midwesterners give could help us. That these winters will drive us crazy until we learn to get out into them. Let me give you a couple of examples. I know someone recently who took a bold, courageous step to get out into the messiness of a struggle he's dealt with for a long time. There was some serious fear about what would happen if he faced this struggle head on. And I'll tell you, the unknown is so scary. It was scary for him, but he let his fear be a catalyst of courage. And instead of letting that fear paralyze him, he chose, I'm going to let that fear drive me to take a courageous step. And instead of remaining paralyzed, he let the fear lead him to take that courageous step into healing and wholeness. And it was beautiful to see. Fear is a catalyst of courage. I have another friend who's been dealing with issues concerning his family, upbringing, his current relationship with a parent. And even though it was scary, he chose to set up and schedule an appointment with a therapist to start to work through these issues. This kind of thing is scary. I'll tell you, for me, when I first started going to therapy, it wasn't so much the hard work of, I gotta go, it's gonna be difficult, it's gonna be challenging. It was the unknown of it all that scared me, because you never know what's gonna happen when you start to open up old wounds, right? You never know where therapy is going to take you. It's unpredictable. But we know often those wounds can drive us crazy until we learn to get into it and deal with it, right? Fear is a catalyst of courage. As Chittister reminds us, when fear of the unknown strangles the heart, one tiny act of courage can bring hope alive. Hope is a series of small actions that transforms darkness into light. It is putting one foot in front of the other when we can find no reason to do so at all. I love that. One tiny act of courage can bring hope alive. It's a series of small actions that transforms darkness into light. You know, I don't need to say this, but this year has been brutal. It's been brutal. And right now, even in this season we're in, these cold winter months are setting in. There's more darkness than light. It's becoming easier now even to lose hope and to slip into despair. We feel the dark, cold around us, and many of us feel the cold darkness within us as well. We may feel like we're not growing, that everything is stale and difficult and gloomy. Perhaps we long for life and activity and beauty, and we're wanting those things, but we just can't seem to find it. One thing we can remember about the seasons, and it's cool because the seasons can actually teach us something. God, the way God's even designed our world to function can teach us. And one thing to remember about the seasons is that winter is a time when the earth renews itself. It appears as if nothing is happening, that everything is dead. But in reality, new life is being born. And many of you are struggling big time right now. And I want to remind you and speak a word of encouragement to you that I believe if you are open to it, then God can be working in your struggle. I believe God is working in your struggle. I believe that in your struggle, renewal is taking place. And I believe in your struggle that hope and growth is happening. You know, when Jesus was brought into our world, born into our world so many years ago, the first century Jews were facing just overwhelming and incredible struggle. And so much darkness. As the song says, they faced the gloomy clouds of night and daily saw death's dark shadow cast over their people. They were being ruled by a tyrant king who loved violence. He loved death. He loved killing. They faced the harsh realities of poverty and hadn't heard from their prophets in ages. Stale, difficult, gloomy, dark, cold. Yet, in the midst of their struggle, God appeared, and the weary world rejoiced. Fear is everywhere in this story. I'm telling you, read it. You'll see every time the angels show up, you know what they say? Every time they say, "Do not be afraid." Mary, Joseph, Zechariah, Elizabeth, the Magi, the shepherds, they were all afraid. Yet their fear was a catalyst of courage. They did not realize or know what was coming next, but they took courageous step and another courageous step and another courageous step and another courageous step, and their hope was fortified, their faith was strengthened, and along with God, they brought light and hope into places of darkness and despair. And after their many steps, they met Jesus, the Savior of the world. You know, during this overwhelmingly dark and difficult season with fears upon fears, I want us all to not run from the struggle, to try our best to not run and hide from the struggle, but to embrace the struggle and to learn to get out into the places that scare us most. So I want to ask you this evening, what scares you? What scares you the most? What are you afraid of? What fears are you facing that could serve and be for you a catalyst of courage? What does courage look like for you right now? You know, some thoughts, Christina and I were talking about this, some thoughts were that maybe your fear could be making a choice, like my friend, to see a professional counselor, to begin working through some issues you're facing. Maybe courage could be that for you. Maybe it's having a tough conversation about something difficult and meaningful, like racism, with a family member that you know you need to talk to and get into these issues with. Maybe it's reaching out to some friends and just telling them, hey, I need support and I need some help. Maybe that's hard for you. Maybe courage for you is admitting that you have an addiction and it's time to get better and find healing. Maybe courage for you is beginning that journey of forgiveness of someone who has hurt you. Maybe courage is reaching out to some people who make you uncomfortable and beginning to form friendships across boundaries. Maybe courage is showing up to that Zoom gathering, even though you hate those things, so that you can connect in a virtual way when you're feeling isolated and share your questions and your doubts with your church family. You know, if we allow fear to be a catalyst, a spark for courage, then we might just find the light of Jesus in the midst of our darkness. What does courage look like for you right now, tonight, in this moment and season of your life? You know, fear can lead us to cling. It can lead us to freeze, to hold tightly to things that falsely promise us security. Or fear can be a catalyst of courage, giving us the resolve and the strength to let go and to step out into the unknown. Mary and Joseph, oh man, they were afraid. The Magi were afraid. They had to go face, you know, the King Herod who probably wanted to hurt them after they didn't, you know, follow through with his orders. They were afraid. Elizabeth and Zechariah were afraid of this idea of, can we have a child at such an old age? The shepherds were afraid. They were scared to death when they were out in the fields and saw the angel and knew they ought to travel to find this new baby. They were scared, but with God's help, they let fear be a catalyst of courage. They took courageous step after courageous step. And eventually they found Jesus. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.